Hello, everyone. I have some very startling news. Now, brace yourselves, please. I hate to say it, and I hate to admit it, but Nick Fuentes could be a Fed. He could be a federal agent planted to divide Americans, to influence the minds of young Americans, and worst of all, to support Mossad. Now, the last part I'm kidding about, but in this sort of line of work, it's questionable. Everybody's questionable. Tucker Carlson, for instance, seems to be the biggest Fed of all. Honestly, I truly believe that Tucker Carlson himself is just a grifter and nothing more, nothing less. He seems to 180 on his positions like Marjorie Taylor Greene. As soon as they don't have any power or as soon as they get blacklisted from some sort of news agency, the first thing they go and do is they go and start their own, or they renounce their previous views hosted at said company or news agency, and then they go off on their own and or try and accumulate further with the actual popular views of the time and not the mainstream conservative policy. Now, with that being said, where does Nick Fuentes fall into this? Nick Fuentes falls into his own lobby, similar to where Trump is or was in 2016, where Trump was more of an outsider. He was pushing against the traditional conservative, the neocons, as some might call them. He was pushing against the neocons, and what he ended up doing was creating a new party. People were speculating that he was actually going to fabricate his own party in 2016, which never came to fruition. I think that's what a lot of the neocons were hoping. I know I had some professors that were speculating that, and really what that means is they were just hoping that Trump would just leave because the conservative party was against it pretty much. The ideas in the conservative party. He aligned with many of them, but he was not following the doctrine. And what Trump managed to do is he managed to cultivate his own cult of personality, and he was able to essentially put in a new conservative philosophy, and that's the one that people follow now. Now, when Trump is gone, will it probably revert? Yes, most stuff will revert, but a lot of what Trump has pushed will stay. Now, what does this have to do with Nick Fuentes? Nick Fuentes is very similar in the light that he himself is pushing for a new conservative agenda that specifically against Israel, because at the moment Israeli support is at an all-time, I wouldn't say an all-time high, but for both parties when it comes to senators and members of Congress, it's never been higher. There's the almost universal support for any sort of action that Israel has, and there's no condemnation for it at whatsoever in the Senate or in the House of Representatives. That's all because AIPAC. AIPAC obviously supports Israel, but has been supporting them by influencing politics within the United States of America. I know if you've paid any attention or have looked under any rock whatsoever, hell, if you've clicked on this video, you've most likely heard of AIPAC, and you most likely know their influence in the United States government and how strong it actually is. But what I'm trying to get at in particular is where Nick falls into this. Why now? Why in this a crucial time, I guess, for Israel, is there a leading opposition leader against AIPAC and Israel itself? I think truly, actually, that Nick is not a Fed, but the evidence is, I wouldn't say stacked against him, but it's definitely there. He's 180 on a few of his positions now, which is mildly concerning because he hasn't done this before. In a recent interview he did, when it came to talking about J6 and his involvement and why his money was frozen up, he completely neglected to mention the fact that Israel had any sort of involvement in that, or specifically the Jews. Now, me saying that will almost certainly get this video removed from YouTube, or at least demonetized, which again shows you the overall influence they have on not just media, but in the overall government. Besides the point, back to Nick Fuentes. Nick himself has stated previously that his money was locked up by, Jewish bankers because they didn't like what he was saying, and they were banks that were owned and run by Jews. Now, besides that, he himself just recently admitted that it was actually because of a U.S. foreign policy investigation when he received an anonymous donation that was suspiciously large, to which his money was then frozen and he was prevented from leaving the country, which is why he was also put on a no-fly list, which all of these points that he was making previously were evidence against specifically Israeli influence and Jewish influence in the U.S. government. Now, surprisingly, he is 180 on this position. Maybe this is just the truth and he was just speculating earlier on. I would give him the benefit of the doubt, don't get me wrong, but truly it is kind of odd that it was not revealed sooner, or at least he didn't announce that publicly when he found out about it, whenever that may be. Maybe at the time it was good for ratings, who knows? Similar to Donald Trump, it's easy to play off these big mainstream news events and what people actually want to hear versus what's actually going on. Now, does this make him a federal agent? Probably not. In his line of work, anything you say could get you listed as a Fed. And it just so happens to be that he's the biggest voice right now. So everything he's saying, everything he's doing is being monitored under a magnifying glass. He's being looked at through a microscope. They're trying to find any sort of shred of evidence that this guy is an elite. that this guy is not for the people. He is not America first. And truly, and again, this is me 180 on my position. Well, hey, I didn't even tell you my position. I don't think he's a Fed. I think he's a legitimate guy. I think the odds are that he does have America's best interests in mind. I think that recently he's becoming more tame with his political views as to be more digestible, which is what a lot of his supporters are vehemently against, and they adamantly say that they don't want that. But the reality of the situation is, it's not all just the Jews. I mean, to an extent, I gotta watch what I'm saying, but he needs to stop saying that. Otherwise, he's not gonna get as much polling as if he was to run for any sort of office, which I'm assuming he would at one point in his life. He's a career commentator at this point, or talking head, I guess you could say. Well, with all that being said, the Nick Fuentes conversation is a long one. It is very large. There's a lot that goes into it. Where it goes from here, nobody knows. He's getting more and more mainstream attention, which is interesting and very good. I think his actual sway is undeniable. When I have people I know coming to me talking about him and they've never ever been interested in politics previously, that's how I know that there's something truly interesting going on here. I will say the only grift that he's involved in, though, is definitely the watering down of his political views. He hasn't truly, obviously, watered them all down. He is stand by most of them, but there are so many that he is effectively what some might say maturing over. But in reality, I think it's just to sort of branch out further, get more of an audience. But I don't think he's the type that he would completely 180 on any sort of view he has without credible evidence against what he believed previously. And that's the best type of politician or American that we need at the moment. And what, honestly, every American should be, because at the moment, everybody, whenever they see anything that they disagree with, they shut it down. They won't look at it. They go back into their echo chamber. They won't have a conversation with the person. It's insane. I'm sure one or two of you must have experienced this previously at some point in your life, and that's just unfortunately the nature of the political landscape today. That's all I want to talk about today, guys. I'll talk to you later.